like to do this morning is I actually get the fun part of the morning. And I get to go and actually show you the first bits and show you actually what the product is going to look like and what you're going to be seeing in the next couple of weeks as you receive the bits and as we get closer to the release. Now, I want to go ahead and set the expectation for you that, first of all, this is an early build. So we're not foreseeing any problems, but go ahead and set that expectation. Second of all, you will see some things, and as Garth mentioned, we had the terminology issue. And for example, you will see in the user interface terms that sometimes it's called a cluster and sometimes it's called a rack. In the final version, it will be cluster. So we are working that out. So just go ahead and set the expectation. The user interface probably will change in some ways from what I show you now to the final product. So with that all said, here we have Application Center 2000. Now what we have here is actually an MMC plugin that allows you to administer the product and to work with the product. We also have a web interface that I'll show you in a few minutes. So I'm going to come in and say, let's go ahead and connect to a machine. And I'm going to connect to demo brick 01. And I'm going to go ahead and connect to that as the cluster controller. It says, okay, you don't have a cluster on here. Do you want to create one? Yeah, let's create a cluster. So it brings us to the cluster wizard. Now this is going to ask us just a few questions about the cluster that we want to create, get that set up, and then go and do all the work for me. So first it goes through and it says, okay, I want to find out some more information about this machine. It's looking at network cards. It's looking at the configuration of the machine, grabbing that information so you can use it later. So I'm going to come in here and just say, let's call this demo cluster. And for the description, demo for the Tech Summit. So it comes in now and says, okay, I've got 3 types of clusters that I can create. And I'm going to come back in a moment as to what exactly each of these is. For now, I'm going to choose the standard web content. It asks me, what type of load balancing do you want to use? I have the choice here of network load balancing, of using a third-party load balancing service, or no load balancing at all. So I'm going to go ahead and choose NLB. I select the network card to be used for network load balancing. Now, since I'm using NLB, it's asking me, okay, now how do you want to set up the affinity? How do you want those requests to be routed through the NLB service? I'm going to go ahead and choose intranet for now. I select an email address that can be used for notification. In this case, it's me@Microsoft. And we're ready to go. And when I hit finish here, what it's doing is it's going out and creating all of the information that is required on that cluster controller. It's going through and setting up all the spaces to keep the information about the cluster. It's going through and setting up the cluster for the type of cluster that I had specified. Now, the 3 types of clusters that it mentioned. First of all, there is a standard web cluster. And what that is doing is that is expecting to get IP traffic into the cluster, distribute that using some sort of load balancing, and to serve web content and COM+ content through the machines that are in that cluster. The second type of cluster that I have is a COM+ cluster. And what that is doing is that is expecting to receive calls in and use the component load balancing aspect of Application Center to distribute those COM+ calls through the machine in that cluster. The third type is a DCOM router. And what that is doing is because there are changes between the original demo of component load balancing and our current incarnation of it, that is really a compatibility item so that we can use what was previewed before, or you can use the improvements that we put in. The component load balancing or he's going to get much, much deeper into that, and so I'm going to let him handle the explanations on it. Also, it's going through and setting up network load balancing to work on this machine. And so here we have our cluster. And when I come in and click on the cluster itself, as it comes up here, I've got three choices under here that I've got. I can look at the members of the current cluster, and right now it is a cluster of one machine. Why is that not coming up? We'll look at that in a moment. Second of all, I can look at the applications that are specified on the machine. And third, I can look at the events. I'm going to come back to all of that information. What I'd like to do now is, since I only have one member, a one-member cluster is really not doing that much for me. So let's go ahead and create a second cluster, or just add a second machine into this cluster. Excuse me. So I'm going to right-click on the demo cluster, and I come in, and under All Tasks, I've got two options here. I can disband the cluster, or I can say, let's add another server. At this point, it brings a second wizard up, and I'm ready to add a second machine in. So I hit Next. The server I'm going to add is DemoBrick 2. I'm going to put in the ID password. In this case, is administrator. And since we're going to be doing a lot of configuration on the machine, we do require that you have an administrator password in order to add the machine to the cluster for security reasons. So I want to add that to the cluster that is controlled by DemoBrick 01. It's going through the same process of investigating the machine and seeing exactly what is, how this machine is set up. I choose my network load balancing card, and I add the server. Now what it's doing here is it's using an idea called a single application image. And what that's doing is it's taking an inventory, and I've got a manifest on the cluster controller of all of the applications that are running on that machine. It's using that single application image to set up the configuration, the content, and the components on the second machine. So it's going through and not only worrying about setting up network load balancing for me, it's also going through and making sure that all the COM+ components are there. It's making sure that my web vroutes are set up. And all of the applications, it's making all of those ready so that the cluster can then be ready to serve content from either machine. We're going to get into a lot more detail as to all the things that are going on behind the scenes, but that is essentially what it's doing. Now, I've got an application set up on these machines. In this case, I'm using the FM stocks. And as Garth said, what I wanted to emphasize here is we're using an existing Windows DNA application. So you don't have to go through and make the changes, and you don't have to change your code in order to get this to work. Now, as this is coming up, one thing I'd like to show you is I'm going to flip over now. I'm going to try this, and I think I know what the issue is. Nope. Let's make sure that the service is started. And yes, it is. There we go. So what we have here is the interface for the web. And you'll see it is very, very similar to what is presented in the MMC add-in. Now what we have here, the difference between the two, in the MMC add-in, you saw that I could right-click on Demo Cluster. Well, when I right-click here, nothing happens. So you will not have all of the functionality that is in the management console, but you will have a lot of the functionality. And as we go through the day, we can get into more detail as to what you can do and what you cannot do in the web interface. So let's see how we're coming over here. So now I've got my cluster set up with 2 machines that are ready to receive content. I can come in and click on an individual machine and look at information about the performance and look at performance metrics for the individual machine. Or I can come in and look at the performance information for the cluster as a whole. Now, as I come in, I can also look at the applications themselves. And in this case, I've got an application set up. So I'm going to go and add FM stocks. So I come in and say new application. Let's say FM stocks 2000. And so it adds my application. Now, to set up the content within the application, and again, Martin's going to go into more detail on this, but I can come in and say, I want to specify a website. And so I click on Add, and it goes through, and using the settings that are in IIS, I can go and drill down and say, I want my application to be default website root FM stocks. Now I can go through and set up the other items that are in that single application image using a very similar interface, specifying here COM+ applications, data source names, file system paths, registry keys, all of the things that make up that application. And from then on, I can manage this application as this single entity. So I can say, I want to deploy FM stocks. In the days of having to know that FM stocks contains these 68 items or these 6,800 items, I don't have to worry about that anymore. Application Center is taking care of that for me. And finally, we also have a view here that I can look at the events. One of the things that we have heard a lot of issues are the way that we handle events in NT4. That if you've got 100 machines set up in a lab and you want to know what's happening on them, you either have a third-party solution or you go in and manually look at the event logs on each of the 100 machines. What we have set up here is the ability to look at your events throughout the cluster itself. So you see here I've got information going on, memory conditions, I should have cleaned this out, etc. Going through and looking at the events across the entire cluster. So I don't have to go and look in the event log. I don't have to look in the IIS logs. I don't have to look through all of those things to see what are going on. And Alex is going to get into much more detail on what we're doing here, but that's a critical item which is going to make the entire cluster much easier to manage. Now, the final thing I'd like to show here is I'm going to flip over right now to my laptop. And what I've done is on my laptop, I've got it set up so that it's going in and hitting the IP address of the cluster itself. And you'll see here in the middle that I've got a little flag on here saying served by, in this case, DemoBrick01. This is kind of like when you go to a restaurant, I'm DemoBrick01, I'll be your server today. Then I can come in, and as I open up more, one more item. Why is the mouse dead on here? Show you what I'm doing here. I want to come in, and DemoBrick2 is online. Okay. And it should be distributing the calls between the two. Well, my big bang for the end did not work as expected, but of course we will get that working. But that is the general product that we go through. We allow you to set up the single application image. We allow you to set up the cluster using the cluster wizard. We allow you the idea of an on-demand scalability, allowing you to quickly add servers to the cluster, remove clusters from the server. And finally, we go through and allow you to do the performance monitoring to see exactly what is going on in the cluster itself. Any questions about the demonstration or anything that we've gone through so far? Yes, right here in the middle. The question is, well, what exactly is this cluster controller? How are we defining it? Now, what that cluster controller is doing is it's keeping the information about the cluster itself. So the applications that are running on it, the machines that are in the cluster, those types of ideas. It's also the master machine for the replication engine. So as we go through and talk about replication, it's going to use the content that is on that machine as the source for the other machines. Now, a key idea here, as we said earlier, that we have no single point of failure. If your cluster controller goes down for whatever reason, all of the other machines and the content will continue, or other in the cluster will continue to serve content and will be active machines. The items that you will lose at that point are going to be the replication service and the ability to add or remove machines from the cluster. At that point, you can promote one of the other members of the cluster to cluster controller in order to get those facilities back, or you can do whatever is required on the cluster controller to bring it back up.
Well, one quick question. If we could, I just want to keep us on track. We've got about 5 more minutes for Q&A at this point. If it's a technical question related to any of the core services or how it's going to work, if you could just hold that until we actually get the PMs up here, they're going to be able to bore you to tears about how everything actually works. But I just want to make sure, like, everybody understands sort of from an overview standpoint at the 50,000-foot level. Have we made the sort of product design goals clear? Has the demo been understandable? Okay, good. Are there questions about that? So why don't we do this? Why don't we take a 5-minute biology break and then come back here, and then Ori will get started on the next session. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Oh, stop. Stop. That's not necessary.